Let's talk to David Bailey, who's Professor of Business Economics at Birmingham University. Always great to have you on the programme, David. So what exactly is BYD asking the courts to clarify or to correct? And in practical terms, what would change for BYD if it won tomorrow?
Well, I think what's interesting about this is that it's the first big Chinese company to challenge the US government in this way. There's been lots of other companies who have challenged the US government over what it sees as a kind of excessive use of its authority. And in particular, the president used what was called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEEPA, to justify those tariffs. But that's being challenged. There's already a court case from a wine importer which has gone to the Supreme Court and is being decided on at the moment. We may hear about that by the summer. But this is the first time a big Chinese company has also got involved. And what BYD is essentially saying is the president acted illegally, and it acted illegally in putting in place tariffs on imports from countries like Brazil. Now, why is that a concern to BYD? It has a big production plant in Brazil and could, in theory, export those cars to the US.
So that would be what changes for it. It will suddenly have much more power in terms of the export market. Is that what you're saying?
Very much so. So, I mean, you know, BYD is investing heavily in Brazil in a plant which could produce up to 300,000 cars. It's re-looking at its previous decision not to build a plant in Mexico, so it's reconsidering that. So if by challenging the US government, tariffs were brought down on imports from Mexico and Brazil, that would provide a way into the US market for BYD. Remember, Chinese-made cars are effectively blocked out. That was under law which went back to President Biden, and the tariffs are over 100% on Chinese-made electric vehicles. This might be another way in for BYD into the very lucrative US market.
So you're talking about levelling the playing field, and I suppose what you're saying is that if BYD loses, it kind of locks out Chinese EV makers or out of the US market in the long term, or are there maybe some viable workarounds?
Well, there may be some workaround. You've already conceived, for example, that BYD produces commercial vehicles in the United States. So it makes electric buses there, for example, and also is trying to get into the market in terms of batteries. So I think there's a question mark about what does the US actually want here? Does it simply want to decouple completely from China, in which case it's going to block imports and investment? Or ultimately, would it like to see investment in the US in making things and in jobs, which is the way the European Union is going? At the moment, it seems like the US simply wants to block them out completely. Europe has a very different approach.
You talk about this case as being a bit of a first, a bit of a test case. I wonder how much of it is really about BYD and how much of it could shape the treatment of all foreign automakers trying to compete in the US.
I certainly think it's a massive case, and it's certainly a massive case for the Chinese automotive industry, which is, you know, given the sort of slow state of the market in China and the extreme competitive pressure, is looking to produce around the world, in Southeast Asia, in Brazil, in Mexico, and then looking to export to, for example, Europe or the United States. So this could be potentially very, very significant in the context of China becoming the world leader in batteries and electric vehicles, and the balance of power shifting from the US to China.
US tariffs are meant to be about protecting domestic industry. I'm wondering, though, if they're actually distorting the global automotive supply chain, making it more expensive, making it slower, more fragmented, and ultimately more expensive for consumers.
Well, so on the consumer side, it's certainly the case that it will push up prices, reduce competition, and make things more expensive for American consumers, both in terms of imported products, which are now subject to tariffs, but also in terms of things made in the US, which require components that are coming in. So that's absolutely clear. I think as well what the tariffs have been doing is really separating the US from the rest of the global market and the global supply chain. And I think what we'll see increasingly is the likes of the European Union, the UK, increasingly looking to China because it is the technological leader. So in the case of, for example, the European Union, which put tariffs on China, it's now rethinking that. It wants to keep open access to the Chinese market. It may decide, actually, we need to get closer to China.
And of course, there were automotive representatives when Keir Starmer went to visit China, when other European leaders went to visit China. So you really feel this is a conversation is really moving the dial and that we're going to see maybe more cooperation between Europe, UK and China?
Yes, I do. I mean, China is the world leader in the technology. It's 20 years ahead. It's able to produce electric vehicles at 30 or 40% lower cost. European manufacturers simply cannot compete at the moment. Now, they need to catch up. But I think reinventing the wheel is very difficult. What would be much more sensible is to say to the Chinese, look, come to Europe, come to the UK, set up production, start producing here. Remember, that's exactly what the UK did back in the 1980s with Japanese investment, which reinvigorated the UK auto industry.